Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Climbing Sycamores podcast, where we look at today's topics to get a better view of Christianity. I'm Annie Beege, and I'm joined by my friends Ben Sadler and Matt Harbach.
Let's roll. All right. Hey, everybody. This is Ben Sadler. I'm here with my friend, Paul Nitz, and this is an interview podcast today. And the reason I want to talk to Paul Nitz, first of all, I'll give you a little bio of him, and then we'll talk about why I wanted to interview him. But Reverend Paul Nitz, he served as a missionary and a theological educator and a team leader in Africa for almost 3 decades, I think, or for many years. And now he serves as a counselor for the world mission efforts of the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. He has a keen interest in intercultural competence and biblical Greek and pedagogy of teaching adults, linguistics, language learning, team building, business, and ministry coaching. I just find Paul fascinating.
Thank you.
And so I got to know Paul, especially we were in the pastor's coaching network together. And I think mostly when anyone else was going to sleep or whatever, we were still talking about culture and team building and all sorts of things that I'm just fascinated by. So I'm just so thankful for you to be here. So I don't know if anything you want to add to your bio, anything else you want to tell us?
No, that's good. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always fun talking to you, Ben.
So you told me about this question. I wanted to start out with this question. What's on your mind? What's on your mind lately?
Yeah. That comes from The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay-Stanier. Yeah, and I've been really devouring his books. He's got 4 different books. And I guess that's what's on my mind. I'm a mission counselor, so I do a lot of talking with others and just getting them to talk about their ministry and their life. And that's a great question. What's on your mind? And then, you follow that up with, what else is on your mind? Mm-hmm. And then what else is on your mind? And it's amazing how people will come to conclusions and figure things out by themselves just with some facilitation. I think I'm helpful in doing that, but just listening and coming alongside people, it's important and it's powerful.
So why is it so important that they come to those conclusions?
Because advice is so unreliable. It really is overrated and unreliable. The very best thing that you can say about advice is, if I were in your situation, mm-hmm. and if I can imagine that, you're being in your shoes, maybe such and such would help. Mm-hmm. That's really the best that advice could do. So
is this a new idea for you, or have you always thought this way?
No, that's fairly new.
Okay.
But it really clicked. When I learned this, both in, Marcus Buckingham, mm-hmm. one of his chapters in the book 9 Lies talks mm-hmm. about this. Mm-hmm. He talks about it pretty powerfully. Mm-hmm. And then Michael Bungay-Stanier, Brene Brown, mm-hmm. other people like that. It's a lot about listen and advice once in a while, but hold it off, be curious, keep on talking, keep on, keeping that conversation alive. And
I think that's a hard thing to believe, because when you go to somebody, you think you want advice. And when you're coaching somebody, you think you're supposed to give advice. And then when you actually give advice, the person receives it, doesn't really help them. Usually they don't really like it, or it misses the mark. And sometimes you're forcing it. So it's an interesting thing, because you think you're supposed to be giving advice, you think you want advice, but you don't.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah. Advice is overrated. Listening is underrated. Mm-hmm. And the idea of coming alongside, like you and I both have studied Greek, and there's this really great word in Greek that was used to refer to the Holy Spirit.
Parakaleo.
Yeah, parakaleo. Parakalo is I come alongside, mm-hmm. really. I mean, it literally means I call alongside. Mm-hmm. Para is alongside, and kalo is to call. So that's the literal basis of it. But what does it mean, come alongside you? It means to comfort. Mm-hmm. That's the way it's used. And Then there's paraklesis, which is used for the Holy Spirit. And Jesus saying, I will send the person who will come alongside you and comfort you. And I think we're sent to each other to come alongside, listen, comfort, empathize, and not be the savior, not be the expert, not be the advisor, just be with people.
What are some things that you've seen happen when you do that?
Well, I suppose internally, like in
both.
myself.
Yeah. However you want to take that.
Yeah. So internally, it takes practice. It takes discipline almost. And it takes a little reward. Like you have to see that holding off on your advice, because you really want to be useful and significant. And you really want the other person to, think, oh, wow, he's really got something to offer. So you have to kind of resist all those internal prideful, sometimes prideful urges. And then what I've seen in people is, wow, they got a lot to say, and they got a lot that they can discover just through thinking out loud with another person that will help them with their problems or help them sort things out. So I've gone away from conversations where I didn't say much, and then I'd say, so what was helpful today? And somebody would say, oh, so awesome. That was really, really helpful. I don't know if I would have gotten here without you. I've had other conversations where people have said like, well, that wasn't very helpful. But those where you just have listened and they found a lot of value in it, that confirms the theory, so to speak.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think I told you I'm 1 year into a 3-year program for mental health counseling. And what I'm amazed by is how much this schooling is trying to teach you as to what not to say. So much of the program is don't use closed questions. Don't give advice. You're not going to tell people what they should be doing when it comes to their medication. You're not going to give any advice on that. You're going to steer clear from all these different things. And so much of the work is what you're not supposed to be saying in a session. And it's a lot of schooling to know what not to do. And so it seems like that creates room, for people to open up, come alongside, and has this assumption that the answers are already inside of them, and they'll get there if they just have, maybe, as you were talking about comfort, I was thinking, people need that comfort or that safety to really be able to drop all of their guard and get to the root of a lot of their concerns and issues. And if you don't have that kind of probably safety, you're always kind of in that fight or flight, you're never going to get there, right? So I think that's really powerful. Well, that's great. I wanted to also get into your perspective on culture. I think that's one of the things I've always been interested in, your perspective. You spending 30 years in overseas in Malawi and Africa, and then now coming back to the States, and you're kind of like an outsider looking in, and you just have had some really interesting insights. So I wanted to start with this one. So what are some of the stories from your time in Malawi that would help us understand the uniqueness of that culture, understanding how they understand relationships or time or work or faith or roles of hierarchies, things like that? Do you have something that you can think of a time that kind of said, oh, that really kind of explains what is different about culture in another place?
I mean, the short answer is it's so complex.
Okay. Yeah.
That it's really hard to come up with a story. But I guess one of the big things I learned was the artifacts of culture, the things that you see.
Okay.
The way people talk, food they eat, the way they dress, and all those things mean very little. But the values that they hold do produce behaviors that look very different.
So you would say the heart of it is values, if you can find out what the values are. Okay.
Yeah, and the difficulty in cross-cultural communication is a clash of values. So now, here's an example. Like everybody kind of seems to know, let's say you're you have a Hispanic culture,
Mm-hmm.
or let's make it more specific and say Mexican culture, and their value would be more relationship and less to do with time.
Mm-hmm.
This is almost a caricature, right?
Sure.
You know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Whereas the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant sort of culture in America would be more task-oriented,
Efficiency.
and very prompt and things like that. Well, that's easy. Like it's easy to see a value. One value is accomplishment of big things,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is maintaining good relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see that play out. But there are so many other clashes where you can't even understand the value behind the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It happens in reverse too. So one time we were having a conference with some pastors, and we were specifically talking about the cultural difference between African Malawians and Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And we were actually reading a book called African Friends and Money Matters. And we were going chapter by chapter. And each of us in the room had been given a chapter to review and come up with a discussion question or something. So Pastor Mwangomba, he has the chapter on hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
And he does an agree-disagree question. No, it was an evaluation question. That was it. Evaluate this. So there's a Christian, and he's at home with his family, and he's having supper. And somebody comes to the door, and in this case, it was a pastor who's at home with his family, a Christian pastor. And a member comes to the door and knocks on the door and says, hello, pastor. And the pastor says, well, can I talk to you later? Because, I'm having supper with my family and it's not a good time. And then the member leaves. Evaluate that situation. What do we think? And he actually didn't let us discuss. He was pretty excited. And he just gave us the answer right away. What do we think? That Christian pastor is not a Christian. He's a murderer.
Wow.
Well, why? Well, what's underneath there? Hospitality in our culture or American culture is just so shallow. It's just kind of like, I'll make a meal for you or invite you over. Hospitality, that word in their culture, that's like social aid. That discussion went on, and we talked about how in Malawi you're a good Christian. Somebody could come to your house every day in a month at mealtime. And what are you going to do? You're going to give them a meal. And why did they come at mealtime?
Because they're hungry.
They're hungry. And if you send them away, they'll go and starve. Yeah. So, behaviors based on values. And then we get the clash on the behaviors, maybe some Malawian comes to my door when I'm having a meal and I don't know any different. I just think this is, I'm being polite. And, can you come back another time? You can't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So you can have clashes on behaviors, and then you can have clashes on values where, no, I disagree with that. So it's so broad. It's so complex.
One of the things that I've noticed over the years is when someone marries somebody from another culture, and there's this assumption that we're going to figure this out, and we're in love right now, and then in a few years they don't even see why there are so many clashes. And like you said, they can't even though they're in love, they start this family, they're so deeply connected, and they can say things, but the words and the meaning and so many things, and I'm so thankful for the couples that are able to make that work, and they do get very deep into why we're different and how that works and what our values are, and able to adapt. But sometimes it's a whole life, and they still don't know exactly why there are some things that rub each other the wrong
Absolutely. And somehow through living overseas, we just knew a lot of friends who were mixed culture marriages. Yeah. Right. So you'd have the husband's Japanese and the wife is from Australia, or there's a Zimbabwean and somebody from Ireland or whatever it is. Yeah. So we just ran into a lot of mixed cultural marriages. And I think there was a reason. They were in a third culture. They had become an international school teacher or something like that. And it seems to me that those marriages work out better when they go to a third culture, because it's not my culture or her culture. Because that's really hard now. It's not only a culture clash and value clash within the family. Now, one of the two has a whole society around them that agrees with that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And some of the, like you said, it's not always the cultural artifacts about food or whatever, but aren't there also some cultures where they might have, like, there's some things about Mexican culture that are very similar to Japanese culture. I don't know if I think those are the two countries I'm thinking of, but then Puerto Rican culture is going to might even be, Japanese culture might be closer to Mexican culture than Mexico and Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And so some of these things, it's not just a language thing. It's not just a food thing, artifact thing. It's a value thing. And
and certain values are more likely to clash, right? And so, I've seen that. I'd hesitate to name them, although I have them in my head.
Sure.
Like which cultures are more disparate from our culture and cause probably more clashes.
So this podcast, a lot of times we're talking about how culture, and we're usually just thinking about modern United States culture and Christianity are clashing, and somebody maybe doesn't have a church background, but then kind of starts coming to church, and they're looking at this culture and this Christian culture in the Midwest and at Victory or at our church. And they're trying to figure out, like, what is this? I don't understand this. And so a lot of times this podcast, we're just trying to help make sense of what Christianity looks like and why we live according to some of these values and what makes sense to us. But I guess my question for you is, like, could you describe what the Christian faith looks like in Africa, and what does the Christian faith look like in Wisconsin, the Midwest? And you've already kind of mentioned some of those values of hospitality. This pastor says he's not a Christian if you're not welcoming somebody into your home and giving them a meal. I mean, are there other ways that you would say that's what Christianity looks like in Africa, different from that's what Christianity looks like in the United States?
Well, there's a lot of things you could talk about. Maybe the most significant is the threefold view of sin and grace.
Okay.
Have you heard of the 3D gospel and things like that?
Go on.
So Eugene Nita was a linguist, an American linguist. He's known for translation theory and things like that. And he was the first to come up with this, and it was expanded by others. There's a very nice little book for like $4 called the 3D Gospel, and it explains it pretty quickly. But the idea is that there are three different ways of looking at the world. Our Western way would be guilt, innocence. And that works well. It's necessary maybe even for a really big society. You need laws. You need to obey those laws. You can't just have a big man in charge or things like that. And we tend then to also view the Bible and the Christian message that way, and it's totally true. In God's eyes, we are guilty because we are sinners, and in God's eyes, because of Christ, we are innocent. And so you could spin out more on that, and pretty much any sermon I've heard in America is based on that idea. Well, what about honor, shame? So this would be more like a bigger, not tribal, that's very small, but bigger ethnic group, like let's say Chinese or things like that. It's actually more known in the East. So that's honor, shame. Think of the movie, the cartoon movie Mulan. I bring honor to the Fa family. It's all steeped in that movie and in Eastern culture. And then the third is more smaller tribal village, and that's fear, power. Okay, so those are the three: guilt, innocence, honor, shame, fear, power. Well, now, the Bible has something to say on all that.
On all of them, yeah.
Yeah. So honor, shame. By nature, you are totally shameful.
Mm-hmm.
You are not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
You are thrown out of the family. You don't have the family name.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot step foot into the family house.
Mm-hmm.
Do not appear before your father.
Mm-hmm.
And yet in Christ, we
We're
are
adopted.
so honored.
Mm-hmm.
We are so honored that we're given robes. We're brought into his presence. The angels rejoice over us. So amazing gospel there, amazing good news. And then fear, power, fear is, there are forces against you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is absolutely true. It's certainly in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
There are forces against you that can curse you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Like Africans would say, oh yeah, you scientists told us that malaria comes from the mosquito, but who sent the mosquito?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody sent it.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody must have caused this bad.
Mm-hmm.
So we need power,
Mm-hmm.
blessing over
Mm-hmm.
the bad. Well, look at Genesis 12 and the promise to Abram. God comes to him and says, I will make your name great. This is a part of fear, power too. Names are very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I will make your name great, and you will be blessed and be a blessing.
And those who
And
curse you.
those who curse you will be cursed. This is just straight up fear, power. As you march through the Bible and get to a bigger society like 1 Kings, 2 Kings, you can see a lot more honor, shame.
Mm-hmm.
And then in like Romans and the New Testament, you can see more guilt, innocence. So very broad kind of thing.
I'm thinking also of different authors seem to focus on, Paul, Romans is very much more guilt, innocent, judicial writing. And I don't know, would you say John, almost honor, shame, the love of the Father, bringing someone back in to the family. You're called children of God.
Yep.
Yeah.
The more Hebraic Jewish you get, the more honor, shame you get. The more Greek you get, the more fear, the more guilt, innocence.
Yep.
And then the very early, like Job and early Genesis, now you're getting into more fear, power.
Fear, power. A lot of the Psalms too are fear, power. I would think, especially the beginning. I'm thinking of 1 through 40 or whatever is so much on my enemies came after me. God cursed them. I was cornered, and God, you need to come to my rescue and attack my enemy. And
Okay.
And
I definitely think Americans have shifted.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a kid, everybody I knew. I grew up in Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin. Everybody I knew was, when I look back, would have been guilt, innocence. I don't think anymore.
Right.
You can definitely have mixes here,
Yeah.
right? And in different situations, different things can come out. But think of social media and shaming and things like that. I think that's getting more to the honor, shame.
Is that, I've heard other, before he passed, Pastor Timothy Keller talked about if he were to start preaching again, he would preach more on identity. And I think, I don't know if that's honor, shame.
That's honor, shame.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah. And what is my label? And am I part of a victim class or a victimhood, or what is my identity? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that has definitely shifted. So when you were preaching in Malawi and training, what is the major idea?
Yeah, it was more fear, power, and honor, shame.
Honor, shame. Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't learn this forever. Here I was there for so long, and you'd think I'm some sort of expert or something. I'm not. I just learned how much I didn't know more and more. But yeah, somewhere along the line, I had learned this 3-part kind of way of looking at things that really helped me to preach to someone else and not preach to myself.
Right.
And it got really good reaction too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, could you find, as you're ministering to people, did you see the response when you started speaking to their culture?
Definitely. Yeah.
So now you said when you're back here in the States, it's not necessarily the guilt. guilt innocent idea.
So like you're thinking of culture and Christian culture and things like that. That's part of what you're trying to explore here, right? Well, I mean, if you take Christian principles or the belief in the Bible, the faith of the Bible, that's just universally attractive. I mean, there's no culture that is not attracted to that. But now that gospel comes to groups, and those groups get a culture. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with homogenous groups. I mean, is everything healthy about a lot of that? Is everything wrong about being prejudiced and racist and things like that? But there's nothing wrong or unnatural. Groups will become homogenous according to their values.
Yes.
Those values are not going to, you can't say that there's a perfect Christian set of values.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like, I was so fascinated. You know, we have a long Christian history in our country, and our culture is affected by Christianity, and you can tell it in so many ways. You know, like working hard and certain things like that. And you can go to other countries where you really recognize they had values, they had religious values, they had morals, but they weren't Christian morals. You can see that. Well, I went to Ethiopia, and I was visiting there. Fascinating, because they have such a long history of Christianity, and their culture has been shaped by Christianity, but in such different ways.
In what ways?
Oh, like super respect for women, even though they have very clear roles. And, you know, we might think of that as very old-fashioned roles. And yet I was in a very crowded living room with tons of people, noisy, talking, and suddenly everybody goes quiet. A grandmother had walked into the room. It's like, whoa.
Respect for her.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Quietness, they seem to, the Ethiopians can be, they have high value in being quiet. No noisy talk, no yelling. I came out of the airport, I saw it right away. There's a sea of minibuses, taxis, and people, and no noise. And then I found it with smaller groups and you know, in my interactions too. I'm not sure the value behind that behavior, but it's distinct. It's interesting. There's something there.
Yeah. I guess the thing that I'm fascinated by is there are so many biblical values, so many things that that Scripture values, and in every culture there seems to be some overlap with a true value.
Yeah.
And in every culture, there seems to be some way that there's a value that rubs against Christianity, or is not moral, or not good, or not holy.
Yeah.
And I think because the United States, we do have there's Christian foundations and some background, that sometimes we assume all of the American values are also Christian values, and that's just not true sometimes. And so I'm interested if, you know, again, coming back into the States, are there anything, do those show up a little bit where we think there's overlap, or some people think there's overlap, and maybe you're like, I don't know, maybe we should be thinking about this a little bit more?
Yeah. So you come with an outside view, you've been away for a long time. You can see things more clearly. They're just stark, you know, and, But let me preface some of my comments by saying my primary reaction of seeing the Christian church here in America is, wow, they have such spiritual capital. I mean, these buildings, these people who know the Bible, they have wealth that they can use and are using for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They have people full-time paid fully to help them with that. I think of it as just huge spiritual capital. But what I hear from a lot of people is almost like hunker down, protection, a little cynicism about the future and things like that. And I don't know. From my outside point of view, these are really strong little armies. Yes, in a big sea of of sin and evil and enemies and things like that. But hey, God used Gideon in 300 too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were 7,000 faithful in Israel for Elijah, things like that. I don't really care about the small. I just see the strength and say, wow, it's really, really a blessing.
So it sounds like one of your encouragement would be own that or appreciate that, celebrate that.
Celebrate it and swim downstream. I mean, you have something.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind, you're generous, or whatever your group is, what they're known for. Like, grab it and maximize it and swim downstream with it and attract others into your vortex of Christianity, because it's very attractive. Mm-hmm. It's universally attractive when Christians love one another.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how that shows, it's maybe a little harder to show it in America. We're so compartmentalized. Mm-hmm. We're so private.
Yep.
Like my wife was talking about when her father died. My father-in-law died when we were in Malawi, and her mother was visiting there at the time. Mm. So it was really poignant. And all sorts of Malawians came over. They don't ask your permission.
No.
They just come over.
Yeah.
They don't say what do you need. They bring food. They sit with you. Mm-hmm. They sing hymns with you. Mm-hmm. They didn't do this for us because we were foreigners, but if it was a Malawian to a Malawian, you'd have people staying at their house all night, maybe even singing hymns all night. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what's the contrast in America? Mm-hmm. So somebody dies and you say, hey, can I help you? Oh, no, it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's very... Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's very hard to help each other.
Right.
It's in Malawi. You anticipate. I see Ben is having trouble, and I say I need to anticipate his needs and help him before he asks. Mm-hmm. America, well, I didn't help you because you didn't tell me. How was I supposed to know?
Right.
So I don't know, things like that. The coming alongside. Mm-hmm. Come alongside someone. Being with them, how does that work in America when you have such an insular society? I don't know, but I know that this is a huge thing that Christians can do for each other and bring others into the fold that way, just being with each other, I think.
I remember President Wendland at our seminary, he's not there anymore, but when he talked about Paul Wendland, he talked about when he was out in Utah and how the Mormons, he's like, they're kicking our butt at hospitality. Like if you had a single guy out there for school and, he wanders into a Mormon tabernacle or the whole community would come around this guy and not ask, but anticipate those needs. And And, when you ask somebody what your needs are, that's almost a burden. Like, well, I don't want to tell you what I need, right? And so to be able to anticipate some of those things. And can you detect now the value behind that when you see it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think that's a universal. So when you have a Christian value, of loving, being part of the community, I mean, God put us in families and communities so that we could support each other. There's a lot in the Bible about building each other up, about helping each other financially and in so many other ways, so that you can say, okay, I have a Christian value here. There, I think, I don't care what the local culture says. I don't care if you are really value privacy and individualization and things like that, like our culture does. Break through it, figure it out, because you need to show love to one another. How are you going to do that if you're not with each other? So find the ways to get together, and then things will blossom.
Yeah.
You'll find ways to show love to others and to each other.
If you'd like to get a hold of us here at the Climbing Sycamores podcast, feel free to email bsadler@victoryofthelamb.com. BSADLER@victoryofthelamb.com. If you like today's intro music, it's been brought to you by Andrew Lynch's song, My Name, Hello.